got a beautiful business coach, and every quarter we catch up as a business to look at our strategic, financial and productive goals. So I attend those meetings, which are half-day meetings. And if my drive wasn't going to be satisfied on the farms, I really needed to respect Brendan's wish to just slow down. So I needed to put my energy somewhere else.
Yep. Yep. Understand that feeling.
Yes. Well, I think a lot of us do, probably done a more detailed or informed business plan and understood what a business coach could do in the 12 months before purchasing the asset. I suspect that we probably would have been far more profitable and probably would have been a whole lot less stressful. We had assumed that the business that we had entered into was mostly a production business. And by that I mean everything was focused on, the price of fertiliser or the price of diesel or availability of seed or plant and equipment and or the amount of kilos that the livestock are going to be increasing. And I remember on a weekly or fortnightly basis, weighing cattle, I shudder, but it was such a production focused reality. And it was only later on in the process of really thinking about the business that I realised that we actually had two businesses. And I remember Nigel Kieran mentioning this at different young farmer Little River Land Care groups that he was organising at the time. So this is sort of 2013-14. That we were farmers effectively ran two businesses, one being the land business or the water business, and then one was the productive business on top. And I remember thinking, oh, it's really interesting. I hadn't really heard of that concept before. And, we all think that it's about the cattle work, the sheep work, the shearing, the sowing and the harvesting. But in fact, it's something that's far more serious than that. And that is acquiring the asset, maintaining the asset, keeping the asset in its best format, and then understanding how that asset can be revalued to enable you to either invest in lots of infrastructure on farm or maybe scale.
Yeah. And it's the difference between working in your business and on your business.
Oh, very much so. And in our first year where we had germination at 93.5, and then our contract said that we'd only be paid at a seed value at 95% germination. And realising the difference between a seed price and a feed price, something like $4,000 a tonne difference. And then learning later on through the industry grapevine that seed company just blended other seed that was 97% germ to lift ours from 93 to 5. So they made, an enormous amount of money. And we lost $400,000 in that crop in our first very year. And I just think that experience for me meant that A, we'll never trust like we did trust, and B, I now read contracts very, very, very carefully, and we'll never, ever be in that situation again. And during the most recent drought, and you guys might be similar because you had access to some water, but I felt sick. We had designed a business based on when everyone else was dry, that we would have a little bit of water, not all of our water, but a little bit of water, and that we would probably be able to keep trading through and hopefully maintain some seed stock or breeding stock or whatever. But I was not prepared at all for just that 3 or 4 years of brown and everyone else really not going well and us having a little bit of green in our paddocks.
Yeah.
I don't know if you felt a bit sick, but I found that I've been so clever to think about this business, but then it kind of worked too well in a weird kind of way.
Yeah, yeah.
But I've since learned that agriculture is actually the only time that some farmers make money is when other farmers don't do so well. There wouldn't have been a worse time for that to have hit us. So we'd only just purchased the farm in May. You know, we'd harvested it in March, April, and we were kind of like sweating on that income coming in. We just paid all the stamp duty. So as a first generation farmer, we didn't have the intergenerational stamp duty exemptions. So we had to pay the full ad valorem, and I think the farm was about 2.4 million. I can't remember the stamp duty that we paid, but I think it was around 130 or 140,000. And then you have to pay for all of the crop going in. So there might have been another $200,000 or $400,000. The bank would only give us a small $75,000 overdraft, and so it was kind of like that year where everything went out, and the interest bills were 12,000 or I don't know. They were just like insane. Yeah. And I remember going, "Well, this has been fun." Even though the cash flow budget was like really well researched by someone like me using my spreadsheets, I don't think the day-to-day realities of cash flow kind of hit. And so when that decision to pay us a feed price versus the seed price, and just the devastation that caused us at a personal level, when the drought happened, we actually reached out to a number of people that had either supplied us with trading animals or were people who had really helped us out over the previous 8 years. And we said, do you mind if you are going to sell any of your animals of any kind, please let us buy them, and you can guide us on which bulls you want, and then when this drought breaks, we'll give you back your animals. Yeah. And we agreed on prices and stuff like that, and
got it written down.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Write it down.
Yeah. Write it down. I suppose what I'm saying is, if you're an accountant or you are a wool grower or an oyster farmer, or like, it doesn't really matter who you are, but let's imagine that you genuinely don't grow your own hay. Yeah. And all you're doing is going to somewhere in South Australia and Victoria and trucking in cheap hay, without any guarantee of quality, and then just trucking it again, and then the hay actually doesn't even go to your farm. You're just really coordinating at a logistics level. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. I'm not talking.
Those prices.
Correct. It's just basically just putting a margin. Yeah. And that level of profiteering, I think, it's been interesting to watch that practice being noted, and people never forget. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? I suppose that's the surprise.
Sometimes we can have short memories in some areas, and we can be very forgiving in some areas. Yeah. But other things we're like, noted.
Yeah. I think some of the unspoken ground rules of the agricultural sector in New South Wales or in the Central West or Australia or whatever the nuanced sort of culture is, there is a really easy way to learn it, and that's just to sort of attend lots of functions and enjoy speaking to people and just do the right thing. And most of the time, over conversations at the back of the ute or an afternoon tea or at a bushfire or whatever, like wherever you are, you'll eventually, over a 10 or 15 year period, pick it up. But women who join their husbands if they've married into a farm, or if you're like Brendan and I, where you have acquired the farm when you were 28, 29, I'm only now really understanding the rules of the game at 40. Yeah. I think I've still got my Masters and PhD to go.
It's like when you first moved there, you're like, yeah, I'm the apprentice.
Probably listen more than you talk.
Which is a hard thing to do.
Oh, let me know. I failed miserably. So yeah, that's a hurdle. And be very careful who you trust. I certainly think that the Trojan horse and a lot of those old parables around like the Peloponnesian War, and maritime and military strategy, and there's wonderful books from Roman times which talk about trust and how people trick people, I really think you need to be very careful in social circles and business circles out here, because the person who you think might be the most welcoming and kind and open and trusting person ends up just being the district gossip. And if you are going through a time of losing children through miscarriage, infertility, maybe you're having a really rough time in your marriage, or I don't know, just life might be just throwing you a turd, and you accidentally release your heart and talk to someone, and then you realise 12 months or 2 years later that that person just is a complete gossip. I just think that's probably one of the things that I just did not realise.
Sometimes that's when you need to reach out for external help, or whether it's a free hotline, or whether you find yourself someone else that you can talk to in confidence.
Yeah.
Which, we don't always have access to, being rural, or finding the right person that fits with you. But it's definitely not nice when you sit down and let your heart go and then find out it hasn't landed in the best place.
Yeah. Just had no idea that gossip is a commodity in its own right out here, and I just find it. Anyway, says so much more about someone else when they're talking about someone. I far prefer to talk about stock markets, commodity markets, weather, gardening, children, than talking about another woman.
Stick to safe topics.
Yeah, and I think I ended up going back to the bank and just saying, righty-go, we're going to have to borrow a bit more. And the bank's like, you're kind of at your limit. I'm like, yep, I understand that, but here's my 10-point plan on how to get out. If something goes wrong, this is what we're going to do. And one of them was chopping wood. We'll
do anything.
Yeah, we'll do anything. And they were like, oh, this is that. And they were selling, items of equipment and, a few bits and pieces. And so they said, okay, we'll kind of give you that balance, but we want it back within 12 months. And I was like, phew, okay. But the piece of advice that during that time of trying to find those last scraps of money to get over the line, my mum had said to me, well, look, the location that you've bought the farm is a good one, and you'll be easily able to sell it if it doesn't go well. And I remember thinking at the time, it was like a smack to the face, but I remember thinking, oh yeah, okay, well, I suppose if this experiment doesn't go well, we'll hopefully get our money back, And I remember thinking at the time, actually, that's really clever advice. And over the years, as we make decisions to buy another farm, or as we decide to enter into another lease, or if we go and, we just put in some new silos and they were just eye-wateringly expensive and different things, it was like, well, fortune favours the brave, but you always have it to sell. And
I think that's where that saying comes in, do you have debt or are you in debt? and where do you feel on that scale? I think that's sort of where we're sinking towards in the conversation as well.
100%.
Yeah.
There was a fellow in my Nuffield scholarship that rattled that off, and initially I hadn't heard it. It was Brendan that heard it from this fellow, but it was fascinating to understand that certain families had rules, policies, guidelines in relation to how they did debt, and that wonderful difference between having it and obtaining that debt and being a debt that you could therefore sell or get rid of, rather than being in a state of debt and not controlling it. It was it was a really pivotal change point for us, because it meant that we weren't a failure that we're in debt.